Okay, today we're going to talk about chapter 6, the Israelites. So, first of all, most people think of this chapter really as like the Jewish chapter, okay, or Judaism. So, what you have to remember is yes, we call the religion now Judaism, but the people who originated this were actually called the Israelites. So, the Jewish name is actually something that happens later in history, okay, but it is the same original people and religion. All right, so one of the major differences in this religion versus all the ones at the time is that it's going to be monotheistic. And the people of Israel believed that there was certain prophets, and other religions have prophets too, that they believed are messengers who share God's word with the people and they spread the word, okay? And the main word of this religion is that it's a monotheistic, very different than the other polytheistic religions that have been happening in the area, right? And this religion, Judaism, is responsible directly for Christianity, grows directly from it. When we do the Christianity chapter, you'll see that. And then actually, Islam also has a lot of the same beliefs and prophets. So it always kind of shocks me when people have such negative thoughts about Muslims when actually the basis of the religion is actually the same as most people, right? Christians and Jews. So I think that that comes from people not understanding that a lot of the religion is actually the same. All right. Well, when we get to those, you'll learn more about that. So this is um, a lot of the beliefs we have for Judaism come from the Hebrew Bible, or actually it's called the Tanakh. And the book often says Hebrew Bible. I know a lot of Jews who don't really like that term because they say, why are you calling it like a Christian version, like saying it's a Bible? Um, so just so you know, your book calls it the Hebrew Bible a lot, but actually, I think the more um, correct term probably is Tanakh. Okay, so let's see. So you will find that Christianity is going to grow, like I said, right from the beliefs of Judaism. So the Christians actually also believe, I guess that's where the Hebrew Bible term comes from, because the Christian Bible, the Old Testament is this Hebrew Bible basically, okay? Um, and then they grow and add more to it later. So you'll learn about that more later. So, like I said, very heavily influencing the other two major religions that we're going to talk about this year. All right, we'll get to those more later. So, this religion, you will notice in your book that it says very often, according to the Hebrew Bible, and then they tell you something. That is because, like all religions, some people think all of the stories are in there are like fact and actually happened. Some people think that these are like stories to teach morals and maybe are not really literal. So I am not going to be the arbiter of like what truth is, and neither is your book. So just so you know, these are all what is taught in the religion. Whether you think that it all happened or not is up to you. Okay. All right. So according to the Hebrew Bible, Abraham was someone who was spoken to. God told him that if he brought his family to Canaan from Mesopotamia, that he would one day, him and his descendants, that land would be theirs. Okay, so he packs up his entire family and his entire household, and they make the very long journey from Mesopotamia to this new land. Okay, and so I have a map for you here, and of course you can see it's a roundabout journey because you're of course going to want to stay around the rivers as long as you can, um, to make your trip easier, right? And anyway, so today that area where Canaan is would be like Lebanon, Israel, Jordan, like that area. Okay. And so this was called the promised land a lot because it was promised to Abraham and his descendants. Okay. So to make a long story short, Abraham eventually dies, and his son Isaac it becomes the new head of the family, and then his son Jacob, who is now the grandson, right, is the one that is what we call the beginning of what they're starting to call Israelites. Now, the story is interesting. Abraham's grandson Jacob was visited by an angel in the Bible, it says, and he was after that referred to then now as Israel. And the idea is Israel meant one who struggles with God. Now you see in this artist's painting, they painted it as like a literal struggle, but many people believe that this actual was more like a metaphorical struggling with God, right? And that, so he, his faith, struggling with his faith. So, this, anyway, for after that, he is now called Israel instead of Jacob. And so then that's where we get the term Israelites, the people who followed Israel or the descendants of Israel. And what happens is eventually, he had 12 sons, and the 12 sons of Jacob all become the leaders of the 12 tribes, they call them. And the 12 tribes are a much larger group of families or clans, okay? And so you'll hear the 12 tribes sometimes or read about it, and then you'll know that they are the descendants of Jacob. Okay, and so to make a long story short, they live in Canaan for many, many years, and then there's a famine. So Jacob's family migrates to Egypt, and they live there peacefully for several generations. But eventually, the Egyptians, the Pharaoh, is feeling uncomfortable that there are so many Israelites living in Egypt, and he fears that they're outnumbering, right, the Egyptians, and that they might rebel. So he puts them into slavery. He forces slavery on them. Okay, and that's where we get the famous story eventually of Moses leading the people out of slavery. Now, your book does a very brief talk about Moses. And so I just want to say for a few things. So first of all, Moses is an extremely important prophet for Judaism, for Christianity, Islam, and even Baha'i faith, if you've heard of that one. And so all of them believe that he was the major prophet and the founder of that monotheistic religion. And just so you know how I was saying how Muslims, I'm surprised. In Islam, Moses is actually so famous or so important, a central figure. He's mentioned 115 times in the Quran, their holy book. And only Muhammad, who most, is their God, the name for God for Muslims, is only referred by name 4 times. So a lot of people say that's an indication of how actually similar the religions are in their basis. Okay, anyway, so your book very simplifies the story of Moses. It really starts with the later part. If you want to read or a good movie actually is the Ten Commandments. Is a very famous old movie that won a lot of awards for the time. And if you're having a hard time with all this religious stuff, if you're not religious and you want to watch a movie to kind of help you get an idea of it, it might help you actually to watch it. It is kind of long. I'll warn you. But anyway, so to make I'll try to make it short. So Moses, the Pharaoh, remember, is feeling like the Israelites are a threat. So the Pharaoh is worried about the population of Israelites and that they might try to overthrow. So the Pharaoh, and by the way, the Pharaoh is not named. So the historians disagree on exactly which Pharaoh it could have been, right? If it was in truth, in real life. By the way, also, there's not a lot of historical evidence that a lot of this happened. So some people think a lot of this is just stories, right? Okay, but anyway, so Moses, his mother saves him from a decree. The Pharaoh had decreed that all the Israelite males, um, all the male children had to be killed to try to, keep the population down of these Israelites. The mother hides him, and then when she's afraid he's going to be discovered, she sets him adrift in a papyrus basket on the Nile River, and he floats down to the Pharaoh's daughter. And she finds it and takes him, and he becomes, a child of the palace, and he grows up as a adopted prince. Okay, but he doesn't know that he is a Hebrew, right? And so eventually, over time, he does kind of protect the Hebrews. He actually beats an Egyptian to death because they were beating the Hebrew slaves, and he actually is cast out, or he has to get out of the country, and he goes into Midian, and he lives a life of a shepherd. And during that time when he is an outcast, kind of, right, and he's in hiding, he actually is visited by God and in this burning bush. Okay, and the burning bush, the reason it's like miraculous, right, is because the bush actually didn't burn. It was like light and the impression of fire and the God speaking to him from this bush, but the actual burning didn't happen. Okay, and so in this visit from God, God tells him, you need to go back to Egypt and lead your people out of slavery. And of course Moses says, how am I supposed to do that? The Pharaoh is not going to listen. And so he says, don't worry, I will give you some, magical powers, right? And the supernatural powers will help you. And that is what happens. And he goes back and he talks to the Pharaoh. And of course, the Pharaoh's like, I don't believe in your God and all that. And he has some magic, like his staff becomes a snake and things. And that doesn't convince him. And so God sends down 10 plagues to try to keep convincing the Pharaoh to let the people go, and of his power as this God. And I have a separate Edpuzzle for you about all the 10 plagues to watch. But the short story is, eventually he is worn down, and the Pharaoh finally does let them go. And when he lets them go, this departure of all the slaves out of Egypt led by Moses is called the Exodus. And it's a very long journey. I have a video for you about probably the most famous part, in the movies at least, is that while they're leaving, the Pharaoh changes his mind and he sends his army after them. And to protect the people, God allows, gets the power through to Moses so that Moses can actually part the Red Sea so that the people can cross safely. And then as they get to the other side, crossing over the Red Sea, then the army of charioteers that was following them, the Egyptians, the sea closes and drowns them all. Okay. And so I have a video clip from that movie I was telling you about, the 10 Commandments. It's very dramatic. It was what was popular. Like, this was good for the time, right? So imagine, right? Some of the CGI and stuff. Okay, so let me show you that. Oh, and also before I do that, the holiday that Jews celebrate, Passover, is commemorating this freedom from slavery. And we'll get to the holidays in another lesson. Okay, so watch this video.
The Lord of hosts will do battle for us. Behold his mighty hand. taste of his nostrils. Lead them through the midst of the waters. His will be done.
He opens the waters before them, and he bars our way with fire. Let us go from this place. Men cannot fight against a god.
Better to die in battle with a god than live in shame.
Praise God and down into it!
Okay, so on to the covenant. So the Jews go, you can see in the map, they cross over the Red Sea, and then they are, this is going to be a short story, but Moses goes to Mount Sinai, and he goes up the mountain to meet with God, and when he does, God says basically, enter into this promise with me. I will make sure you get to Canaan safely as long as you follow, right, these rules or these teachings. So he gives the rules to Moses, and Moses is gone for quite a while, and the teachings that God gave to Moses are collected in what's called the Torah. And you'll notice that the famous part of this, right, is that part of the Torah is the Ten Commandments. And the story goes that he came down from Mount Sinai with these chiseled on these stone tablets, okay? And the ideas of all the rules that God gave are collected and put into this Torah, which is the first part of the Hebrew Bible or the Tanakh, okay? And you've heard, I'm sure, of the Ten Commandments. You'll notice that a lot of them are what we now think of as laws, right? Thou shalt not kill, commit adultery, steal, bearing false witness means testifying falsely, right? Lying. And you'll notice the other ones are things about having a monotheistic God and like not acting like a polytheistic religion, right? So you shall not worship any other gods, right? And you should not have graven images. That means like idols, idol worship. And that was a thing that the polytheistic God religions did a lot. And so he's basically saying, right, none of that is okay. And number 3, look at there, you shall not take the name of Lord in vain, right? So if you ever see some people, especially older people, who get upset when people say God or Jesus kind of like when you're swearing, right? Or when you're like frustrated and then people get upset with you, that is why. Because if you take a very strict interpretation, right, you're kind of using it as a swear. And so that's why people get so upset when you say that. So that's something good for you to know anyway. All right. And so that's the short story there. So the other thing is, so they eventually get to Canaan. Now, again, there's a lot more story to it. There was some of the followers did do some idol worship, and because of that, God punished and said, you're going to be lost in the desert for 40 years. And so the next generation will get to go to Canaan. You won't. So Moses actually died before getting to the promised land. It's actually Joshua who gets his people there. But they finally do get to Canaan. And so when they do, There are, of course, people living in Canaan. And so we're going to talk about the different groups. So one of the groups that's living there is the Phoenicians. And we mentioned the Phoenicians last time. If you look on the map here, you can see a little bit they're in the northern part of Canaan. And we talked about this already, that they were really famous for their trading. They had well-built ships with oars and sails, and they went all the way around to Greece and Spain and Western Africa. Some people even think maybe around to the British Isles. They exchanged cedar logs and glass and jewelry, and then they got back, tins and precious metals that they would go trade with other places. And so they were very good sailors. They plotted their voyages, obviously using the stars and the sun. And so we know all that. Also, we know that they are famous for their purple dye. They extracted this purple dye from shellfish. It's extremely long, hard process, so it was very expensive. So you may have heard of it called royal purple before, right? Because this dye was so expensive, only the richest, right? The royals could afford it. And even if, you couldn't afford a whole cloth, your whole outfit couldn't be purple, you might have like a little strip of it. But it was very, very expensive, but very coveted, right? Because it's so hard to get. The other thing we talked about is that they had an alphabet, and they spread that with all of the trade they do. Since they have such a huge trade network, and they have colonies over in Africa along the Mediterranean, like Carthage, and they spread their ideas with all their trade. And so the alphabet, of course, is going to be a big deal. Having an alphabet makes writing a lot simpler. People can then do more writing and keep better records. And then the Greeks are going to end up adopting their alphabet and adapting it a little bit. And then the Romans, of course, take the Greeks and they adapt it from them. And of course, the Romans are going to spread it everywhere with their empire building. So that is why the Phoenicians are so famous. Okay, another major group is the Philistines. They're in the southern part of Canaan. They were called the Sea People because they came in and invaded from outside. They were probably from like Greece area today. And you may have heard of the Philistines, David and Goliath. Goliath is a Philistine. But they had, with their really great army, they came in and they conquered. They made walled towns for protection, and they were really skilled in their iron tool making and weapon making, which made them really a great army. Okay, so these are the major, there's some other ones too, but these are the two that the Israelites have to come and try to battle to get land. So what ends up happening is there is military conquest, and they have to fight. And they think that God has promised them this land, so they think it's okay. It's like a religious reason to fight. And so they do. To make a long story short, there's a lot of battles, and they do carve out a piece of land that's not the best, but it's theirs. They think God helped them in this. There's this famous story about the city of Jericho, how they basically walked around the city walls for 6 days, and on the seventh day, the priests, blew their trumpets, and the walls just crumbled. Like God must have helped them. Okay. So anyway, they do carve out a region for their own. Okay. And the other one of the famous things is the tabernacle. So when Moses talked to God, one of the things he got was very specific directions about what God wanted as far as how to worship him. They were supposed to erect this tent-like structure. You can see there's like a tent in the center for, like, it's supposed to be the housing of God, right? And then one of the things that's in this is the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant is described looking like this. It is a gold-covered wooden chest where they kept the Ten Commandment tablets and some other famous relics, and you could see the handles. They would carry it around with them because they thought it would, God's presence would be with them, and they would do better in battle. So they would erect this tabernacle and have this Ark of the Covenant in there as part of their relics. Now, you may have heard of this before if you've watched the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark, because in that they're looking for this. And it's true, we have never uncovered the Ark of the Covenant. So it is still something that, people would love to find if you, believe that it did, and of course, did exist, right? And so it has never been found yet.